Good morning, everyone. This is Robin Kipke from the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center. And Catherine, are you unmuted?
Hello, everyone. All right, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is Photovoice Part 2. My name is Catherine Dizon, and with me today is Robin Kipke. We are from the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center. Some housekeeping. Everyone has been placed on mute, so please use the chat box on the right to enter your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll definitely take time to answer questions later. Also with us today is Kim Homer-Vagadori from the California Youth Advocacy Network. She's going to help present the content and also be available to help answer questions later. And as the name suggests, this is the second in a series of webinars on Photovoice. The series of 3 webinars and resources to be developed is done in collaboration with the California Youth Advocacy Network, the Center, and CTCP. So if you haven't already, make sure you check out Part 1, which talks about what Photovoice is and what it is not, why you should use it, how to know if you should use it or not use it, as well as the skills that are shared with participants in order to engage them in improving their communities. Another amazing resource you should also check out is the Rover Library. The amazing Rover librarians compiled a ton of resources and made them available all in a nice, neat folder about Photovoice. And you can do a search and or contact Rover to get access. And of course, if you have additional resources to add, just let us know. And there's actually a few that we're going to reference today because they are some of our favorites. The first is the Hamilton Community Foundation, which is published by NACHO, the National Association of County and City Health Officials. The Community Toolbox, which is from the Center for Health and Development at the University of Kansas, countertobacco.org, and of course our friends at the LLA in Fresno. We're going to reference these tools throughout the webinar, and I invite you to check them out in the Rover Library. This website on the very right is also listing several different ways to get people involved during the Photovoice meetings. And it's important to have a variety of activities and opportunities for people to provide input, especially those that might not feel comfortable, say, speaking in public or, public speaking or in a group. Maybe they're better one-on-one, or maybe they're just not as quick to speak up, or even if English isn't their first language. Well, this resource explains many ways to get people involved and actively participate. This is helpful for many other purposes, but definitely for Photovoice with the multiple meetings you'll have and multiple purposes. So that's why we've added that to the Rover Photovoice folder. Of course, if you have more, just let us know. So we have a lot to cover this webinar today, and this is how the content is organized, and I'll just let you read that for yourself. And for those of you that joined us for Part 1, a lot of this might look familiar. It's pretty similar to this graphic, which contains the necessary components for the Photovoice process. It's something we introduced in the Part 1 series. And you'll see that we're going to show this image a few more times, so don't feel like you have to frantically write down all of these steps here. And so with that, I will hand it off to Robin for a brief overview of the Photovoice process.
Okay, so unfortunately, it looks like we have some font changes that have messed up our formatting, but we'll just pursue. We'll keep going on. I thought we'd start out by recapping for everyone exactly what Photovoice is. So Photovoice is a participatory action research methodology that enables marginalized populations to document their lived experience in their communities, promote individual and group reflection and dialogue prompted by the images taken and displayed, which stimulates community activism and decision-maker action to address disparities. So at this point, I just wanted to know, for for those of you who have a little understanding about Photovoice, can use the chat box and just tell us, what about Photovoice excites you so far? How do you envision using it? I think you just enter the chat box and type in some messages there, some ideas about what excites you about Photovoice or how you might envision using it.
And Robin, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, so I'll read off some of the things that are coming in.
Yeah, thanks. I can't see them.
That it is something that can lead to action, and it gives people a chance to share their stories. Some people have said they're not really sure yet how they want to use it. And then it's also an opportunity to customize a message to really showcase the community voice.
Oh, thanks.
And then somebody also shared that it's a way, and we agree, it's a great way to engage a youth coalition.
All right.
And then it's a powerful tool to show someone's perspective, and it's also an ability to share an individual and a community perspective. And then someone else just shared that we haven't started using it yet, but we believe that our youth would like to use it to show how they see things through their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said something similar, and just recognizing, given our current climate, it could be a very powerful tool to encourage participation, and it's also a very creative activity to engage our community members.
Thanks, everyone. All right. So already we have some great ideas about how to use Photovoice. So I really freaked out and apologize about the fonts. It's kind of disturbing. But anyway, so Photovoice is much more than just taking and displaying photos. It's an empowerment building process, which includes all of these components here on the screen. So starting with end-use strategizing to define the project purpose and scope, building trust and technical capacity within the team, taking and reviewing photos, and hosting a community event to share the photos, and finding ways to leverage community awareness of the issue into tangible change. So today, we're just going to be focusing on these orange-colored boxes that cover the how of designing and conducting a Photovoice project through the selection of images. The what you do with those images and how to share and use them will be covered by the third webinar in this series next month.
All right, so the first step in this how-to process is some end-use strategizing, because with almost anything we do, we need to take time with our team to your internal team to do some end-use strategizing. Now, this is done before you recruit Photovoice participants. And with your team, you'll want to read up on Photovoice and, of course, watch these webinars. So end-use strategizing is a term that we use here at TCEC, and it refers to the process where you think strategically by first establishing where you want to end up. What is your end goal? Because starting at the end allows you to focus your methods and your team and all of your work on an agreed-upon end result. So we actually just did a webinar on this, all about end-use strategizing a few weeks ago, so I won't go into the specifics here. Instead, I'll encourage you to check out the webinar, which is on the TCEC website, and just draw your attention to the fact that some end-use strategizing needs to go on for this process as well. So, of course, the goal of Photovoice is to empower people, give voice to those that do not always have a voice, and to validate lived experiences. And it's amazing just how, if you just acknowledge and share experiences, that it brings people together and it energizes people to get involved. But you also want to get together with your internal team to discuss maybe how broad or narrow the topic should be. Basically, do you want to capture the trees or the forest? And a reasonable place to start is your scope of work. If Photovoice is in your scope of work under a policy objective for, say, smoke-free outdoor dining, then you can decide if you want your project to be narrowly focused on smoke-free outdoor dining, or maybe it's part of a broader smoke-free non-recreational area or smoke-free parks objective or a litter objective, for example. But essentially, you still want to allow room to be flexible so that participants can provide some input on the topics and focus, and basically you just want to strike that balance for program-led goals, but also participant-led goals. Beyond your scope of work, you'll also want to consult with your coalition. You'll need to consider their priorities, and you might need to cast a little bit of a wider net if you want to address issues that your coalition cares about. It's definitely an opportunity to think outside the box, and like one commenter said, to be creative. Definitely, depending on your community, maybe more pressing issues go beyond tobacco ads or tobacco litter. Maybe there's issues of inequities or health disparities that are more relevant in your community, then that can be the focus. And it's also not just about identifying things that need improvement, but it could also be things that you're proud of in your community, images of community improvement and coalition building. You can look at your community with a lens that focuses on assets and strengths as well as needs. The next step in the process is to determine your time and budget constraints, in addition to like a target number of participants. So for timing, you definitely want to aim for at least 3 months. That's what the literature states. And it also states that the longer your Photovoice process, the higher the quality of engagement in your participants. Now keep in mind this 3 months time is in addition to the time it would take to select and train a well-skilled facilitator, which we'll talk about later. But that facilitator will definitely need to see the process through, be flexible and adapted, be culturally humble, and potentially from the target population. They'll need to teach and practice listening skills in order to validate those lived experiences and allow for participant-led activities and involvement. So as you can imagine, training a well-skilled facilitator could take a lot of time, training them, recruiting them, and again, that's in addition to the 3 months that the Photovoice project takes place. And you also might want to consider having 2 people lead, one facilitator and one person to be an observer or a helper to take notes during activities and assist in other aspects. You definitely want another voice and have another person to help understand group dynamics and relationships of the group. And you'll notice that there are a lot of aspects to each meeting. There are going to be multiple meetings, and having an extra set of hands will definitely be useful. There's a lot of awesome data that can also be collected by an observer. Those things like the nonverbal communication, group interactions, or even just to be a note taker or additional voice throughout the session. This could be someone from the community that steps up, or that maybe you see the potential to foster a mentoring relationship with them. But either way, it will definitely be helpful to have someone to help throughout the process. And while Photovoice itself is evaluation, you still want to systematically gather data throughout the course of the process so that you can continually improve how it's done. So as part of your end-use strategizing, you want to develop the evaluation instruments for the process. Collecting evaluation data in this way should be done as a combination of individual and group discussion. So the individual reflection can be done by each participant throughout the process, maybe in a journal style. It can also be done through surveys, which is often conducted paper, pen, or online by each participant at the end of each session with the purpose of improving future sessions. And we actually personally like the retrospective pretest, which is what's shown down here on the left. In addition to individual reflection, you'll also want to do a debrief as a group and have a discussion, hopefully throughout the process, but definitely at the end of the process. And this is a good way to recap each day and see if anyone wants to share something they learned or something they feel inspired to do after leaving the session. And it also doesn't have to be verbal. There's a lot of facilitation activities to elicit information, like writing Post-its or writing your information on a whiteboard or something like that. The website I shared earlier has that awesome table of facilitation activities, so that could be used for this discussion too. And then another great example is from the Hamilton article, which has a really cool tool called the Community Impact Tracking Form. The piece of it is shown here at the top right. And this could even be laid out on like giant poster boards along the walls throughout each meeting, so that participants can add to it throughout the process and then be able to reflect on it at the end. We don't really have time to dive too deep into this tool, but I definitely recommend checking it out. Again, that's through the Hamilton example in the Rover folder. And now I'll hand it off to Kim.
Thanks so much, Catherine. So something that we get a lot of questions about, and this is also specific to Photovoice, is how do we recruit people and who are the people that we want to recruit? And so something that's unique with Photovoice, and if you listened in on the first webinar, you probably heard me say this 20 times, but Photovoice is really a process, and the whole element to Photovoice, one of the things that's so incredible about Photovoice is that it's really an amazing tool to engage people in your local community to show what the problems are and to show the problems from their perspectives and to share their stories. So thinking of that and with that in mind, it's really important that when you're looking to recruit partners, that you're recruiting partners from the community that you're working with, and that you're recruiting individuals whose voices need to be heard. Historically, if you look at why Photovoice came together as a concept and why it started, it was really to provide an opportunity for marginalized communities to be able to explore the problems in their communities, be able to tell what those problems were through their own vision, through their own stories, and then to be able to be part of that process for creating that change. And so when you're recruiting, if you're doing a policy campaign in one community, it's really critical that the people in that community are the individuals that you're recruiting to participate. And also, again, this is such an awesome opportunity to not only recruit community partners that you might know of, but recruit individuals that you've never worked with, who are the individuals from the neighborhoods, the schools, the communities that are directly being impacted by the problem. So when it comes to the time to make your pitch and how do you get them involved, one of the most important things you can do is have an understanding of who this community is. Understanding their realities, understanding their limitations and their capacity challenges, and then that can also help you make your pitch for what you can do to support them. So instead of us going in and trying to work with them so that they can do something for us, we flip it around and go in and let them know, hey, as tobacco control experts, we know these things are happening in your community. We want to share with you what's going on, but we want you to be the ones leading the conversation by telling us how you see this problem, sharing your story and being part of the solution. And so it's connecting in our issue as the experts in tobacco control with our local communities, but then also connecting in what we can give to them. We can provide a platform for conversation. We can provide a platform for them to have a voice in the advocacy, and we can partner together to create healthier communities. And then also, depending on the audience, if you're working with youth, for example, finding out some other things that they might need. With youth and young adults, we know that one great thing we can always offer is an opportunity to do community service hours, internship hours, public health training and experience, and making sure that we're able to really connect in with what they need and the realities, and that we're able to offer those things through this new partnership. And so screening for commitment is really critical when using Photovoice because, again, since it is a process, it's something that we need to engage individuals who want to be involved for the long run. And this doesn't necessarily mean for an entire policy campaign. We know that sometimes policy campaigns can last a very long time, and in some cases they're very short. but it's really an opportunity to connect with individuals who want to be there through that, as Catherine said, at least this 3-month process and even longer, because it's not only collecting the data and documenting the problem and then really having the discussion about what this looks like and sharing stories, it's then taking it to that next level of being engaged in the advocacy and being engaged in the community change. And so it's really critical as the organizers that you're upfront and honest with the individuals who are volunteering to do this so that they understand the time commitment. And in some cases, it's not extraordinarily labor intensive all at one time. It just lasts for a longer period of time because it's the entire process of an advocacy campaign of starting with that data collection, taking those pictures, having the discussions, and then from there, even getting opportunities to do advocacy, to get training on advocacy. And so sometimes those individuals that you work with, they might be people already on your coalition. They may be young people in your youth coalition from the community you're already working with and serving. It could be people that you've never worked with before. Again, the key is really connecting in that the power of Photovoice is to connect with individuals who have stories that need to be heard. And those stories are then transformed into advocacy activities and action. And so it's very critical that these people that you're partnering with are individuals who have an opportunity to share their stories. And from our perspective at CYN, we've been getting a lot of questions lately from people who want to know, how do we work with high-risk young people? Can we work with youth from continuation schools or young people who aren't typically the youth that we're comfortable working with when we go to leadership clubs, but these are the young people who are such dynamic partners because they see this problem with a really unique eye, and it's also an amazing opportunity to engage them and to provide skill-based trainings and opportunities for them to have such a positive impact on their local communities and environment. So we would strongly encourage you, as you're thinking about who to engage in your Photovoice projects, think outside of the box. Think about those people in your community who maybe haven't had an opportunity to share a story, and this is an opportunity for them to not only be engaged and share their stories, but to be able to document what's happening and to share their stories and then to advocate for smoke and tobacco-free communities. Okay, turning it back over to you, Catherine and Robin.
Thanks, Kim. That was great. We're going to try and switch over to sharing the screen and sharing our slides. So once you've recruited, can you see our screen okay, Kim?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. So once you've recruited participants, you'll want to go over with them what the project will entail. Show them what a Photovoice project looks like. And, for examples, you can check out the Photovoice folder on Rover for examples of what you could share. Great, thanks. Okay, so you also want to share how each photo tells a personal story that relates back to community conditions. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to just read this caption, and then we'll talk about it. So after looking at this photograph and reading the story, you can see how the photo and the story together have impact, whereas the photo alone isn't really that compelling. What it represents to the photographer, how it symbolizes something in their lived experience, that's where the voice becomes powerful. So you'll also want to talk to the group about what collectively such a project can achieve in terms of community change. And then it's important to outline the steps and expectations of the project. So talk about each of the components, the time commitment, what participants will get out of the process, and your organization's end goal, which is to empower locals, build a skill set in a cadre of committed change makers, and achieve community improvement. So Catherine already covered how to work with your internal team to define the overall scope and topic of the project. But within that, you'll also want to allow participants the space to decide on and select a focus that still serves your overall objective. Let them prioritize and further define the theme of the project focus within those parameters that support what you're trying to end up with. Without telling them specifically what to do, you can use facilitative techniques to guide them to stay within project parameters. This allows them to feel ownership of the project and thereby create a sense of buy-in, empowerment, and shared vision. Because of the personal nature of this type of a project, it's important to take time up front to build a sense of trust and cohesion within the group so that later on participants will feel comfortable enough to share personal viewpoints, stories, and feedback in a caring yet honest way. So the process of building this cohesion starts with setting ground rules of behavior about attendance, respect, confidentiality, not interrupting each other, being supportive, and remaining committed to activism. But it also includes teaching and practicing active listening skills and how to give constructive feedback, because those skill sets might not be inherent to everyone. So it's important to build time in for that to happen. And Catherine and I are going to be modeling a few examples of these techniques in a bit, but there are also links to group building exercises in the Rover folder that Catherine mentioned. So what's your favorite group building exercise? How do you go about doing that when you're trying to build group cohesion? Send a few ideas in the chat box and Kim will share them with us. And think about techniques you use for both for adults or youth. They're probably very different.
So one thing that just came in is name games.
Name games. I wonder what that is. That sounds interesting. Anybody else have some ideas about how to build a sense of comfort and cohesion within a group?
Icebreakers, doing some health equity related activities.
I would love to get more details about all of those.
The opportunity to practice teamwork together.
Mm-hmm.
Just having some team discussions, also setting up the space about what the space rules are. I think that that's always really great to make sure that everybody is on the same page with team agreements, essentially. One idea that came in was tossing a beach ball with different prompts, and where your right thumb lands, you respond to that prompt. So assuming the prompts are based on the color, and so wherever you catch it, that's where it lands.
Fun.
And making sure, this is really a great one, making sure that you celebrate all the wins that come through. We all know, especially in policy work, that wins come in different shapes and sizes, definitely. And with that, I think that it's a great opportunity to recognize, even going through this project, that you can celebrate those wins as well. Making sure to assign roles so that there is some accountability, but there's also commitment and ownership that comes from knowing what your specific role is. Making sure to discuss symbolism from various photos, so looking at the photos and discussing what they mean to the group. Hearing different perceptions is great. Utilizing everyone's strengths. And then one thing, I can't believe it came this late in the discussion, but eating together. So it's such a great way. And one thing that's really fun too, I just want to add in with the opportunity to eat together, but something that is fantastic to do is have everybody bring food that represents them or their family or their culture, and to have an opportunity to share that together. So that's great.
Thanks, everyone. Those all sound really, really helpful.
So you also want to explicitly address ethics and safety with your group. Being that Photovoice is all about empowerment and being more in tune with the dynamics of power, another layer to add to that is the power dynamic between a photographer and the person whose picture is being taken. And this goes beyond simply asking permission, which we do have forms to get permission, and there are some helpful strategies and tips in the resources for how to do this. But it's also, you want to have that discussion about power dynamics in this context. The way a person is portrayed as maybe, quote, negative, or showing their vulnerability, and a photographer's ability to interpret that person's situation. You just want to have those discussions with the group. And then, of course, there's safety. You definitely don't want to be in a situation where anyone feels unsafe. Strategies like going in groups or with a partner, going in the daytime for both quality of the pictures and natural light, but also for safety reasons. You just definitely want to address that with your group. For technical training, I won't go over that too much because the resources in the Rover folder do a great job, but it's basically how to use a camera, photography principles, color, foreground, background, things like that. I wanted to draw your attention to the technical training as in referring to the subject matter. So, for example, if you're during your end-use strategizing, your internal team decided that Photovoice would be more narrowly focused on outdoor dining, is the example I gave earlier, then you'll definitely want to teach the group about why that's a problem and why that matters. Or if your participants decided that the topics would be slightly different, you definitely just want to address why these issues are important and why they need to be addressed. Because in a lot of cases, we as the tobacco control educators end up being the ones exposing individuals to some of these things that they might not have otherwise been aware of. So you definitely want to take this opportunity to train them on this. You could also do this after pictures are taken, but either way, at some point, you definitely want to take the opportunity to educate your group about tobacco control issues. Okay, so now that you've set the theme and done the training and the focus with the participants, you're going to send them out on their first foray into the community with their photogenic eye and see what they come up with. Tell them not to worry too much that this is their first round, but definitely take some time to think about how that issue might be captured visually. You'll need to specify a time frame and number of photos to capture. They can go out individually and or in pairs or groups to take pictures based on the parameters you've decided as a group. And you can also give some helpful handouts or reminders if that helps. There's plenty of handouts in that folder on Rover. Just definitely try not to be too prescriptive. If you were very specific and said, go out and take pictures of tobacco litter, then they're only going to look on the ground. And you're going to come back with a whole bunch of pictures with things laying on the ground. But if you gave them a few different ideas or options, then the participants have that freedom and flexibility to be creative and truly share their experiences. Remind them it's not something that should be staged or posed or like their goal isn't to make you happy with whatever picture they bring back. The photo should definitely be relevant to their day-to-day lives, even if it just seems obvious or boring. And again, it can be both positive and negative, and ordinary is just perfectly fine.
Right. So reflection happens at the individual level, first after taking photographs, and then with the group, and then again at the individual later when it comes to selecting the photos. So after that initial round of photo taking, instruct each photographer to look through the photographs that they took. And depending on the size of your group, you might instruct everyone to choose 3 to 5 images to share. Then have them choose the ones that they think convey the most powerful message, the ones that maybe have the best clarity or composition, or the ones that really have, quite an impact. And then you'll have them upload those images to a password-protected share site that's just for your group in advance of the viewing session. And with each of those photographs that they've chosen, have them answer some questions like these, which Catherine's going to describe here.
So almost all of the resources in the Rover folder use this method called showed. Here are 2 variations, but they mostly get at the same thing. And again, don't frantically write this down because there's worksheets in the Rover folder, and we're actually going to demonstrate that in a bit. But these are 2 examples of the showed method.
Okay. So here's an example of what a photographer would complete. So they've got the photograph, and then on the right, they write a narrative that answers each of those questions, and they'd submit that to the facilitator in advance of the session before sharing the image with the group. So we're going to walk through our own version of the showed process, and Kim is going to be our facilitator. I'm going to be the photographer, and Catherine is going to be representing the rest of the group who would be viewing this process and listening. Take it away, Kim.
Okay, so Robin, what do you see here with your picture?
Well, this is a picture that I took of a corner store in my neighborhood.
Okay, great. And Catherine, do you have anything you want to share about what you see?
Yeah, I think what I was drawn to, there's looks like there's like a boarded up house or shack in the background, so it sort of seems like not that great of a neighborhood, or sort of run down a little bit.
Okay, and so Robin, you mentioned that this is a store that you see in your community, but what do you think is really happening here?
Well, I took this photo because it's where everyone goes to get their everyday needs met. It's the closest place, but it's really a liquor store. It doesn't have much healthy food, but it sure has a huge selection of alcohol and tobacco products.
Okay, interesting. Does anyone else in the group have anything that they want to share about what they see happening with this picture? Okay, so how does this relate to your life, and how does it relate to our lives and our community?
Well, to me, it relates to the health inequities in our city because people in this part of town don't have access to real food, to healthy food, to reasonably priced food. To find a real supermarket with those things, we have to hop on a bus out of the area to Curtis Park, where people with more money live. We live in a food desert.
So why do you think that is happening?
I think it's because the bigger retailers won't take the risk of serving low-income neighborhoods because of crime, and they think that poor people can't afford anything but the basics and products that sort of are addictions like tobacco and alcohol. And they don't realize, though, that, low-income people are actually charged higher prices for lower quality products, but what they really want is access to real food and a diversity of food. So we really need healthy retailers to come to our communities.
Great. And does anybody else have any thoughts on why things are this way? Okay. So then how could this photo help educate people?
Well, I thought it was really powerful because the sign on the front says, "We accept WIC," but there's nothing advertised but harmful products. Like there's nothing here that would nourish a child. So I thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition that, they're promoting people who, rely on nutritional sustenance for their kids, but there's probably no nutrition in the store.
Okay, well, thank you, Robin. That's a really interesting perspective. So I think it's great, to share your story of what you're seeing in your community and to share your perspective. But what do you think we can do about this problem now?
Well, I think that for one thing, by showing this photograph in our community, we can pair that with big signs that sort of demand retail justice, and we could use that to collect signatures from the population, demanding help from our local officials, and then, once we have those signatures, maybe we can meet with politicians and retailers and business people and other organizations that are interested in food justice and sort of build some momentum to create change in this neglected part of town.
That was great. That sounds like a lot of really important things that we can do collectively, and I really appreciate you taking this picture and sharing your perspectives and some of the actions that you think we can do together.
Thanks.
And end scene.
One thing I'd love to add, Robin. This is kind of unprompted, but we get a lot of questions working with young people about. Sometimes we ask those bigger questions about what can we do to address these problems, and oftentimes ideas come up about some policy changes that are simply things that we cannot do. So they're really lofty goals. We've even had people say, like, let's just ban tobacco. And in a perfect world, we would be able to do that. And so instead of, when those types of things come up, we have this opportunity again as tobacco control professionals to be able to talk through what that means and why. And so, this is an idea that you have for creating change. Well, why do you want to do that? What kind of impact do you think that will have? And then once we hear those thoughts and ideas, we can then connect it into proven policy outcomes that we know work and things that we might be working on ourselves. And so that's where our expertise is very, very critical, because we know, especially with the help from our partners at Change Lab Solutions, what policy outcomes are feasible to do and what we can do to really create that change in the community.
Yeah, and I think that at this initial stage, the aim is to get not only what the individual's viewpoint was, but also asking the group about, not only what they see in the picture, but how they think other people will interpret that picture. And so that's like the beginning part. But what you're talking about is really, really important, that when you get to that stage at the end where you're deciding which images to put together in the public exhibit, which we'll talk about shortly, you can also use some of those prioritizing exercises or learning strategies that Catherine said are in our Rover folder to help prioritize in terms of which of the actions do we think we want to pursue based on what's realistic, as you mentioned, that, framing that for the young people who don't, necessarily know what's possible, what's not possible, what's likely to be more effective than others, but then, involving them in, okay, so once you've explained sort of those parameters, then there's still an option to, okay, well, out of those 5 strategies that seem workable, which ones are priorities for us, and which ones do we feel we have the capacity to have the most impact with? So there's a lot of back and forth here in this process. So thanks for sharing that, Kim. So the aim of sharing photographs is to get a discussion going. It's not just to help the individual select a photograph. So let's talk a little bit more about that process. Catherine.
So as you heard Kim do an awesome job of facilitating this, you can do it in a discussion just like we did. You can also do it in many other ways. So there's something called a World Cafe where you have people sit at tables and then they take a look at these prompts and the pictures and they add in writing or on Post-its their opinions or their responses to some prompts as well. That's a great way to get people involved if they're not willing to speak in public. And there's you can also do sort of a gallery style where you put it up on the wall, again using Post-its, so that you get input from people even if they're not willing to speak up verbally. They can write down their thoughts and share it in that way. But you definitely want to train your participants to give constructive feedback, whether verbal or on a piece of paper. And that's super important because everyone might not have experienced how to frame feedback in a constructive way. So some ways to do that is to review and uphold the ground rules. Those are the community agreements that you established with your group, hopefully at the beginning in the first meeting. As the facilitator, that person will want to stay on their toes and manage and redirect as needed. Again, remind everyone about the purpose of the Photovoice project, to strengthen and empower the power of voice, to always keep the conversations focused and linked back to the goals of the project. Some ways we like to do this is the yes and method. So if you go back to that picture, people can sort of comment. So I see that the address on the store looks handwritten. It's not really like an official sign, and someone else can say yes. And I noticed there's only one light there, one lamp. That would probably be a really dark place at night. It doesn't seem safe to me. And someone else can say yes, and those signs seem like they're falling off, and it's incomplete there. Someone else might say yes, and at least there's people going to it, so it is still serving a purpose. It's been there for a long time. Yes, and it does look pretty clean. There's not much trash out. So you just sort of have a conversation about yes and I sort of borrow that from the improv field, where you say yes and, so that you build upon one another, because the intent is to strengthen one another, not to tear each other down. Another method is the sandwich, which you state something positive and then something maybe not so positive and then something positive again. That's the sandwich. Use I statements, like I think, I wish, I wonder. It makes me feel XYZ. To ask questions, that's a good method. Like, why did you choose to take this photo? Is there a reason why you included this or excluded that? Avoid those need to phrases. Definitely be sincere and watch your tone of voice. And be aware of the timing and frequency. There's a specific time and place to provide this critique. And you also don't want to sort of monopolize the time on this. You also want to focus on things that can be changed, and also point out opportunities, not just faults in something. And then you also want to prepare a recipient for that feedback. Things like telling them to look for that grain of truth that might be useful. Try not to take it personally, and to try to keep your emotions in check. And ultimately to use the feedback to improve and, again, link it back to the goals of the project. So wanted to ask you all, which of these facilitation techniques, these ways of giving and receiving constructive feedback, which of these do you use, or do you have others that you can share? So methods to facilitate the process or to help folks give or receive constructive feedback. Please type that in the chat box, and hopefully Kim can read some of those out loud.
So one thing that just came up was the compliment sandwich, which I know that you mentioned, Catherine, about saying something positive and then something that might be a little bit negative and then positive again. This is a great suggestion, is to work in pairs instead of a big group, and that is definitely a great opportunity if it's a large group, if there's any kind of conflict or negativity in the group. Give and receive constructive feedback, so being open to that. Somebody also mentioned that they also use I statements.
Great. Well, it looks like they covered some of the things that we were going to say about this slide. That yeah, there are lots of different ways to give feedback in pairs and small groups, and sort of as a gallery walk, as Catherine talked about, Post-it notes. You could even show like 2 images at a time and say, which of these speaks to you more? What do you like about this photograph as opposed to this one? So that you're getting people, the group, to engage on all different levels. They could be talking about the composition of the photograph, the clarity of the photograph, or the content of the photograph. So you can have them put colored dots where they vote for different images based on certain criteria. You can have them use flashcards to signal their support or, sort of less support, agreement or disagreement. So lots of different ways to engage. And remember, your end goal is not just to have a great set of photographs that tell a story, but really it is the training of your participants to be great spokespeople, to be able to facilitate critical dialogue and to increase their sense of confidence in their perspective and to be able to give voice to their lived experiences. And so you're going to be doing that through the processes and the activities that you engage with them in. So it's much more than just the photograph. All right, so after that first round of getting feedback on their first round of photographs, it helps to send photographers back out several more times to go through that process again and take more photos and follow that same process of individual reflection and selection, but then getting feedback from the group and seeing what they see in the images, and then making your final decision based on what you've heard people say. And so with each round of this reflection and feedback and selection, participants are incorporating new knowledge into the next photo-taking opportunity. And what they've learned helps them make the final decisions overall for which photos to include in the public exhibit. And ultimately, it's really important, this whole sense of empowerment, is that each individual photographer is the one to decide which of their photographs and captions should be included in the final exhibit. It's not up to the group and it's not up to the facilitator to make that decision, because that sort of erodes that sense of individual agency, empowerment, and validating their lived experience. So this continual feedback loop not only teaches, models, and strengthens individual group capacity to give and receive comments, it also provides the context for expressing and taking part of critical dialogue, which is a very transferable and needed skill for community change agents that you're trying to build.
So the remaining steps of this Photovoice project, the process of a Photovoice project, focuses on public sharing and aspects of the work, which is the culmination of individual and small group activities. This includes putting the exhibit together, finalizing photo captions, planning and hosting a community event, preparing the presentation, promotion, and leveraging exposure into community action. And these steps are going to be covered in Part 3 of this Photovoice series, which will take place on November 20th at 10 a.m. So be sure to register on CYAN's website and get more information there. And now we will open it up to questions.
So one question that just came in is, do the images normally have to have an individual's name, or are they anonymous?
Oh, that's a good question.
I would say it is up to the individual photographer if they want to include their name or a pseudonym or be anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
When in doubt, look to the participant for their choice, their preference.
Yeah, because Photovoice is used, with all kinds of topical issues. Some of them might be, outside of the scope of what we're doing, but people use this process with abuse victims and substance abuse, people who have substance abuse problems. And so, yeah, what's important, you can still get validation about your lived experience. Even if you're not personally identified, you can still have your story out there and hear people's comments without being able to attribute to a particular person. So, great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I would also add, it's kind of two parts. So one part is there's different ways that the image can be shared. So the way that we talked about it today of actually taking the pictures but then having the facilitated discussion, so that's one area. And then the second part is on where you go and do the advocacy or where you're displaying the images. And so that is definitely an area where maybe somebody doesn't want to share who they are and kind of all of the story with the picture. But it does, that question to me kind of brings up why in the facilitated discussion does the individual not want to share? Do they not feel safe in the environment? Do they not feel safe with the group? So that's an opportunity for you to look at what can we do to really support this group and help people feel that they have a safe space to be able to share their pictures. Because one question that's really critical with all of these images is, why did the individual take this picture? What were they seeing that they wanted to share? And sometimes if we don't know who the person that took the picture is, we don't always get some of that depth. So again, I think as Robin said in some of the examples, there are definitely examples where somebody might not feel safe and they might not want to disclose who took the image. So that is completely understandable. But if there's a way, it's looking at, is there something else going on that maybe you don't want to share this image for, and we need to work on coalition building and that teamwork and that groundwork to help people feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, and I think your point about the distinction between sharing within the supportive group versus sharing it publicly in the final exhibit or whatever event you're having, two different things. So, but thanks for raising those issues.
Yeah, and one other comment that just came in on this is that if a photo ever does get shared, that some people might want to know who owns it or who gets credit for actually taking the picture, especially if it gets shared on the internet. Sometimes people might not think that their name is connected with it for the long term, and so it's really important that people do feel comfortable sharing. And again, they're sharing it in different environments. So sharing the picture in the group versus sharing it if it gets published somewhere versus sharing it as a story and sharing it with decision makers.
That's a really important issue to make sure that you're practicing smart file management and, protection of the identities of people. So there are ways you have to save photographs so that, for example, the GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken can be stripped out and that kind of thing. So lots of issues to be aware of about that. And I'm sure if you Googled, you could find resources. But we will alert our rover librarian to maybe include a couple resources in the folder about that. Thanks for raising that issue. Any other comments or questions?
There's nothing else that's come in.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We look forward to part 3 of this webinar series about Photovoice, about what that final end use of the photos, how that takes form, and then how to leverage all of that work into community change. So make sure that you register for that last webinar that will be held November 20th. And Kim, thanks so much for taking part in our webinar today and hosting the technology. And everyone, thanks for joining us. And we hope that if you have additional questions that you'll contact any of us listed on this slide. And this this webinar will be archived and available on CYAN's website as well. We'll have a link on the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center website, and I think it will also have a link in the Rover folder so that anyone can find it and watch it again. Thanks all. Bye-bye.